Hello and welcome to episode 28 of the Mo Money podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Very excited to share today's episode with you where I interview my longtime friend, Riley Maruyama. I found out recently that he crushed his debt. He paid all of his student debt off. And I knew I needed to chat with him about what he's been up to, what his personal finance journey has been since we graduated film school together. And so very excited to talk to him for this episode today. Thanks, Riley, for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
You're welcome, Riley. I don't know if you remember this, but back several years ago when I'd left that basement suite and then you moved in and you roomed with one of our mutual friends. Yep. You mentioned podcasting to me. And before that, I had no idea what podcasting was. And I think you had the idea to start one with a friend. I'm not sure if you ever did. Did you ever start a podcast?
One episode and kind of petered out. It was a flash in the pan.
Well, that's too bad. But yeah, you're actually the one that mentioned podcasting to me, and all these years later, now I started one. But it's funny because when I was about to start when I actually thought of you, because I remembered that conversation we had.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
So maybe you had a hand in inspiring me to start this podcast.
Oh.
You can take some credit if you like.
Wow. I'm pretty sure that's all you, because it's definitely you and all your talent on that side. So
thanks, Riley.
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason I wanted to have you on the show is we went to film school together. I've known you for about a decade now, which makes me feel really old. But we know each other really well. And you recently paid off all of your student loan debt, which is amazing.
Yeah, thanks.
And I think your story is very relatable. A lot of people out there, there's a lot of stories out there from bloggers and podcasters about these people that, have these huge success stories of paying $100,000 in debt in just a year. Whereas you're kind of like, well, you had $35,000 in student loan debt and you took a little bit more time to do it, but you were able to do it. It wasn't like a crazy scheme you did. You were just smart with your money and kind of put your focus on paying down your debt.
Totally.
And then eventually crushed it, which I think is a little bit more realistic than some of those kind of crazy stories of paying off debt in like a year, when I'm like, how much money do you actually make?
Yeah.
So let's, I want to kind of start from the beginning. So we're kind of talking earlier before I hit the record button that you went to school in, I believe, Alberta for a year, but you didn't take any student loans debt on. And then when you decided to move to BC and go to Simon Fraser University, for the film program, that's when you had to take on some debt, right?
Yeah, totally. So basically after that 1 year in Alberta, I moved out to Vancouver, and then suddenly just had that much more for that much more expenses for having to get rent, going to school, transportation, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And it's not cheap to live in that city either. So, and especially doing the program that we did, it wasn't like a normal, you have to pay tuition and books. It's like you also have to pay for your film projects, which are very expensive.
It can be, yeah.
Can be, yeah. I'm sure there's ways to work around it, but I mean, my grad film cost me $5,000. So.
Ooh, see, and I was on the other end where I think mine cost me $500.
Oh, you're so smart. Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, there are definitely ways to work around it. Actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. I just remembered your grad film, and I really liked it because you were the one who sort of discovered QR codes. You're like, guys, this is going to be a big thing. And you were like the one who mentioned it. And it was a big thing like a year later.
Yeah, it was. It's I'm always just ahead of it, not enough to capitalize on anything.
Damn it.
That's all right, though. It's fine with me.
Yeah. So do you take 4 years or 5 years to do your bachelor's degree at SFU?
It took about 5 years, and I did like 3 classes per session. So I was classified as a full-time student, so I could get the loans and all that. But then I also...
But you still worked, right?
Yeah.
You still worked while you were going to school.
Exactly, yeah. Just needed a little bit of extra income to cover the basis. And so that was my game plan.
Mm-hmm. And so after you graduated with a film degree, what actually did you like, all right, now I'm going to, pay off the student loan debt? Or what was kind of your mind frame? Were you kind of like, I'll get to it. Let me just focus on finding my career path, or... What was kind of your mentality at that point?
Yeah, it was, well, First off, it was probably just to land a job because surprisingly right out of school, you kind of have this thought that, oh, it'll just happen like naturally and you'll just get a job and it'll just all come up to you like almost on a silver platter. But it was kind of tough to go by. And so it was really about like selling yourself and learning how to do the business side of your career without ever having really any kind of class in that. So that was a big thing, especially when
that was a big learning curve.
Yeah, knowing how much to sell yourself for, basically like what's the going rates for freelancing, and you know, there were a lot of opportunities that I kind of almost put myself at a disadvantage for like funds just to like be able to land the job.
So you're kind of underselling yourself just because you weren't sure how much to, you know, charge and you just wanted the job.
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What were your kind of first gigs out of school? Just curious.
First gigs. I ended up working with a fellow named David Carter, a great guy. He and we worked on these a few different projects. We worked on one that was like the light box installations at the Kiefer restaurant. So we both kind of R&D'd and made these light boxes with another company called Urban Visuals. So we were all kind of in cooperation when we set out for that project. And then, just different projects alongside with him. Worked with Douglas Copeland and for a couple of his projects, and Judy Radul, one of the professors from SFU. She helped me out a lot with just being a studio assistant for her and just like helping her on her art installations.
I remember at one point, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I remember you thinking that you're going to pursue a master's degree at one point. And if that's true, why did you decide not to pursue that?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's and actually, you know what? It's I find that interesting because I was going to pursue a master's, and during that moment, I was already worked about a year and a half in the video game industry because over time from doing all the freelance art, I ended up getting an opportunity to start doing camera work for video games. And so there was a bit of a slump in the jobs that were coming in, and I kind of thought, oh, maybe I can like study some virtual reality, or I can like go in for this interactive arts degree for getting my master's. And so I went through the job application, or I guess not job, but through the application for the master's, and like was ready to roll for it, but I just started talking to everybody that was already residing at the university, and they're all pretty much gunning for the jobs that I was already working at. So,
oh really?
Yeah,
so when you're like, this won't actually help my career.
It was a 50-50. I'm very sure it would help tons of people, but I already had the foot in the door for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine had a job offer for me in Toronto, and I decided to do that go to my master's, and I haven't regretted it. Great.
No, I know. And it's funny actually that you mentioned that, because I remember you moving to Toronto, and that was actually, you're part of the reason that me and Josh ended up moving to Toronto, because you said so many amazing things about it and how there's so much opportunity and you loved the city. So
it's fun. I love that place.
I know. You should move back. It's a lot of fun here.
Got a lot of things happening on this side of the coast.
I know. You got stuff going on in Vancouver. That's fair. That's interesting. That's really interesting, because I actually remember right after finishing film school, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I knew I did not want to do freelancing, or really, I think I'm just like, I don't think I'm cut out for most of these film jobs. I just don't think that fits with my personality.
Yeah.
It just took me 5 years and a degree and thousands of dollars to figure that out, but that's okay. And I remember talking to a bunch of people, and I think talking to some of our professors, and lots of them were like, oh, you don't know what you want to do? Maybe you should do a film master's. And I was really considering it. And honestly, I guarantee the reason I didn't pursue a master's in film studies or filmmaking was because I just didn't want to take on all of that debt like that. Right. And also I'm just like, I don't know if this actually will help my career. I think this is just kind of, if I were to do it, it wouldn't be to get my foot in the door. It'd be to delay, my reality in adult life. So I didn't pursue it.
That was a bit of a fear
But
of mine have too. It was
yeah,
there was definitely like a big lure and interest in doing research and working with new interactive technologies. But then it was one of those things where I wasn't going to be getting scholarships. It would be coming out of my pocket at the end. So it's just another accumulation of debt where, I mean, like I do feel like you'd still learn a lot while you're working on the workforce. So it was
exactly.
it was kind of one of those situations where the other side just looked a little bit brighter with a bit of financial support. So I was like, okay, perhaps this is a better route for today.
Exactly. So you kind of did the freelancing and then you got into the video game industry. At what point in your early career did you seriously start thinking about tackling your debt? Was it kind of when things were just a bit more stable in your career?
Yeah. It wasn't actually too long ago. It was about, I guess 2 years ago now, where I just I was just paying the minimum amounts and just it was just slowly chipping at it. And I just saw it as like a looming like 5-digit thing, and it kept on being there. And I just thought it was like kind of important for me to take care of just for myself. And like you always hear like how much like the average student has this much debt in, and I was even reading like a CVC thing today, or not even today, just like last week, about like how some students didn't even realize that they had to pay back their loans, and it's just like,
are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, apparently a lot of some students have their parents like do all the co-signing and signing up and setting up of the loans, that there's no real thought of, hey, we have to pay this back.
That's scary. And that really worries me, that there's I know there's a definite need for financial literacy in young people today, but that scares me that some students will take on this debt and, graduate and be like, what? I have to pay back $50,000? Wait, what? How do I even get that amount of money?
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I kind of going back to to my debt, I kind of looked at it at one point and I was like, I just want to tackle it. Just want to clear it as quick as I possibly can. So
do you know how long it would have taken you to pay it off if you had just done the minimum payments?
Oh yeah, like probably 6 or 7 years, maybe.
Really?
Probably long.
And you were able to tackle it in how long?
About 1.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just think of all the interest you saved on that too. Like that's crazy. I mean,
so
so much money you saved by paying it off early. And then I think that's another thing that people don't realize. They're like, okay, I have to pay it back, but they don't realize that, okay, the longer you take to pay it off, the more money you're actually going to be paying. Just like a mortgage, like there's interest involved. Yeah. You're going to want to tackle it as soon and as aggressive as you can, especially when you're young, I find, because you can keep your living costs quite low. So it doesn't seem as, like you're sacrificing that much. But I feel like as you get older, that's, and you maybe have a family or you have a mortgage or a car or whatever, right, it just gets a bit more expensive and it gets a little bit trickier, I think, to just pay it off as quickly as you want to.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it was at that moment too, where, my overhead costs weren't as much as they had been in previous years. I moved into a smaller house and it only cost me about like $500 a month for that. And that's like heat, that's electricity. So I took a lot of those decisions to try to like really cut down what my overhead was. Like I took my car off insurance, started biking everywhere. It like all those small decisions really did pull up to getting through that debt a lot quicker.
And do you find that by making those like little changes of like biking everywhere and just kind of cutting some of your costs, did you find in general that it affected your how comfortable you were in life or how happy you are?
No, it's there's always like that one rough night where you curse at TransLink because the bus just left as you're running up towards it. But like in general, it's been great because I think, well, I know that Toronto and Vancouver have pretty good cyclist communities, and
Hmm.
the roads here for cycling are fantastic. You get that extra fresh air, and I mean, like time wise, yes, like you are investing. You're going to be spending a lot more time on the cycle, but the rewards out of it are pretty good. I mean, you get
Hmm. I know it depends because I subway, so I have to pay I can't
probably like
remember how much it is,
150.
140 bucks or something for a TTC monthly
Yeah.
pass. And Josh bikes to work and he works relatively close to where I work, and my commute is about 45 minutes door to door on the subway, and he says it takes him like 15 to 20 minutes on his
I
bike.
know.
So he actually saves time by biking. He probably gets to his work quicker than most people using a car.
So true. It's for me
Yeah.
every once in a while. It's that uphill when you just like look.
Oh yeah, that's true. You have hills in Vancouver. We don't have those.
You got that slow dip towards the CN Tower or the beach.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, that's so true. Um, so so you aggressively took like a year or a year and a half to pay it off,
mhm.
and once you paid it off, what did you do to? I feel like the one significant thing when it comes to debt payoff is it's important to obviously pay it off, but I think lots of people don't realize what life is after debt, and lots of people can kind of get into those bad habits, especially the people that got into consumer debt, not so much student loan debt.
Right.
They don't really know how to handle life after debt, and they may get into those bad habits again to get back into debt. So, what are kind of things that you've done to kind of safeguard yourself getting back into debt and to start now, from zero, building up your savings so you can think about your future?
Wow. Yeah. That term life after debt, that is, that's
Right?
interesting. Yeah. No, I hear you. Cause like, the first while it felt so good, and it kind of felt, and it always feels like you have like a bit of like a fire in your pocket. So it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, like, I literally I try to take as much as I can still and, put that into a TFSA. And
Hmm.
like right now, I haven't found the best route for investment. I kind of wanted to
Hmm.
like sit down for like a weekend and really kind of go through what's the best kind of route to do that. But
Yep.
so far, just to get the ball rolling, I just toss everything into a TFSA, and that way it's outside of the checkings. It's something that I'd have to go
Yep.
into the bank and be like, I demand this money. So it's
Hmm.
it's helpful for me in that sense, like just off the card into some other accounts, so I can just like still manage and still budget as if I am paying off the loan.
Hmm.
Just try to keep
hmm And I
most
think
match.
that's a great way to do it. I think is to, especially when you're like, I'm not ready for investing, but I'm done with the debt repayment. I guess a good first step would just be to building up a really good cushion or emergency fund, so you do have a good chunk of change in case something does happen.
Right.
You can pay in cash. You don't have to use your credit card and get into debt again.
Yeah.
And then once you've kind of reached a certain dollar amount, like for me, I always when I was just starting out, I wanted to make sure I had $10,000 in savings in
Yep.
cash. And then I wanted to pursue investing because I'm like, well, if something happens, like I have to go back to school or something, or I get laid off and I need money, I want to have a good chunk of change so I can live and not rely on credit. So I think that's a really smart thing that you're doing. And it's exciting that, the next step is then once you reach that goal is to pursue investing whatever makes the most sense for you and your future
Yeah.
plans. So that actually kind of brings me to my next question. What kind of, now that you're like financially free, as we say in the personal finance community, what are kind of some of the dreams or goals you have for your future? Like, do you have an idea of, I don't know, some things that maybe you didn't think you'd be able to do? Like maybe you can buy some property, maybe you can go on a nice vacation, or think more specifically about retirement.
Wow. Yeah. That's it's a lot there,
This is a
Jess.
big question.
Yeah.
I know, I know, I know.
Um, let's say on just like on a side note too, on top of tossing things to savings, I always had the thought, especially with doing contracts and doing freelance work, I always tried to keep a
Hmm.
minimum safety net within my checkings, and that was always about like 3 months or 4 months of like of just like rents, or just
Yeah.
like the minimums where if work never came up, you could get by for a couple of
Hmm.
months and
And I guess,
still
yeah,
live
that is kind
at
of
it.
the tricky thing. Sorry, that is kind of the tricky thing about working as a freelancer and working on contracts. You have to always have some kind of safety net.
Yeah, so that was just like it was just a small thing where it's just like I always thought that was really important because I have dipped into that before where you're months in and you haven't gotten any work and you're like, okay, it's like this is my red line. I really have to get a job at this kind of point. So that's always been a thing as well.
And I remember you mentioning, I think this was maybe you were still living in Toronto, but you thought there was like one opportunity that was you were talking to some people and you're like, I think, I might have another contract in a couple months. So I'm just kind of waited out in Toronto. And then I don't think it ever happened. Yeah. And then you chose to move back to Vancouver. So I bet that safety net really helped you in those instances where you think you have a pretty good idea of like, no, I think this is going to, happen. And then it just doesn't, because that is life. Life just throws you curveballs like
exactly. That. Yeah. So it's yeah, definitely. So you just because you can't really expect the unexpected. So it's like, it's always good just to have a little bit in case. So that was like, yeah, because it did end up coming to bite me where I thought I had a contract set in stone and turned out that they just didn't need me. So it kind of left me hanging. And like at that point I was transitioning to move. So it was hitting that red button and being like, okay, maybe moving's not the best decision. Maybe I should try to find work here on the West Coast still before plunging myself somewhere that's like a little bit like, even though I lived there for a bit, still kind of foreign to me. And just like the risks were a bit high at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back to your future plans, if you have any. I know
it's so crazy, but like I do love traveling. I want to see a lot of places. So my thought was is to at least make one trip per year and try to do that on a budget. Because you can still Airbnb and you can still find like the good places to go without having to be like full on tourist and hit all those benchmarks. But so traveling is very important, but also the idea of retirement is pretty important to me as well. Because, honestly, like I don't think I'm going to have a pension. I know.
I hear you.
I think we pay into some kind of retirement plan, but I don't. Yeah,
I wouldn't rely on the CPP or anything like that. I feel like I knew that once I started looking into personal finance when I was like 25 and knew I was probably going to work I thought I was going to work in the arts industry. I'm like, so I'm never going to get like a pension from a company or anything. So I have to just fund my whole retirement. So that kind of honestly put the fire in my belly because that scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, no, it does for me too. Cause like, I think I'll always have a good job in this industry, in the arts industry. But there's always like 100 new people every single year graduating that were in my shoes years ago, that have far better ideas than I do at this prompt moment right now. But it's like at least I have like a good solid foundation of my work, and I know how to do what I do well. And I'm, so it's one of those things like how long can I ride this? And is this something that could be a lifelong career? I really think.
Yeah. And I'm sure it can. absolutely. You're very talented.
Oh, for sure. Look at me. I'm digging for compliments. That's horrible.
I know. No, you're not.
Jesus.
No, I agree. I think you need to really, not prepare for things to go well. I know that sounds really pessimistic, but you really do have to, prepare for the worst if it were, because you just never know what's going to happen. You also know, you don't know how long you're going to live. You don't know how your health is going to be. So another thing you should probably look into, and I'm going to bug you about this after, is disability insurance, just in case you don't get it through your work. Because that's another thing that Josh is actually, I'm going to have to bug him about, because he needs to get that. But yeah, lots of things that you need to just kind of, they're annoying things, and they're things like, oh, that's not a problem in my world right now because I'm, in my late 20s, early 30s, but some, things that we do need to, think about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, I'm going to have to hit you up for all that information because honestly, like...
Oh, yeah, I got some good book suggestions for you.
Okay, yeah, because like, it's like, it's ridiculous to still like be 30 years old and still feel like a fledgling when it comes to like what are you supposed to do with your money? How are you supposed to save this thing? So it's any information is good information for me.
Which is why I'm doing this podcast and sharing these stories, is because I feel like the one thing that a lot of us, especially millennials, didn't get growing up was this financial education. We had to educate ourselves, and sometimes it's later than we want to. And I think it's something that we really need to, talk openly about, so we know, what to do, what not to do. And so money and the future isn't so scary.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, yeah. Awesome. Well, before we go, is there any kind of advice you would give for, let's say, current students or young people that are thinking about pursuing a job in either the film industry or the arts? Is there any kind of advice that you would give them, like things that maybe you did and you wish you didn't, or, things that you did and they were very helpful?
Yeah, I think the number one thing, like I said prior, was like having like that safety net of just like a few months rent always saved my back. That was something that constantly saved me. And that was like, and I had to learn how to do that, because like the first couple of months outside of school, it was like I was so close to, calling back home and be like, please, Mom, I need some more money. But it's it was something that took some time to like really kind of get into that mindset, where it's just like, suddenly I have this money, like now I'm going to go spend it on something crazy. It's like, no, use that towards a possibility that you might not get this kind of job again. So that was always the biggest thing for me. And I think it helped me out with in a lot of circumstances. I mean, and it doesn't mean that you can't treat yourself. It just means that, you just got to like kind of just tighten things up a bit.
Yeah. And just be more conscious of what you're actually spending your money on. Like I still, whenever I buy something, even if it's little, it's like, Jessica, do you actually need this? Yeah. Are you going to remember buying this in a day? Right. If not, maybe you shouldn't buy it.
Yeah, no, it's, for me too, it has to have some kind of utility. I mean, like, or else it's delicious food, which can be.
I know. I love my food. I spend a lot of money on food.
Financial suck at this moment.
I know.
It's not good.
I know, man. Well, thank you, Riley, for joining me on the show. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you for having me, Jess.
You are welcome anytime.
Right on. I can't wait to hear more podcasts from you.
Once again, thank you so much for listening to episode 28 of the Mo Money Podcast. Remember, if you want to check out the show notes for this episode, all you have to do is go momoneymohouses.com/28. And if you like what you hear, I hope you do